All right, test. Good morning. Welcome, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us here at 901 Congress. Also want to extend a welcome to those that are joining us online here today. In just a few moments, we are about to begin the program, but before we do so, there's about 4 pieces of housekeeping items that I want to go over with y'all. Number 1, usually at this moment, we'd all be enjoying a nice box lunch as we go through this discussion. But because of the time constraints that we have to put on this program, so much information we want to get out there with just so much or so little time today, those box lunches are actually going to be ready and available for y'all on the way out today. So thank you so much for your patience with that minor tweaks of the program, but I promise you we're going to get y'all fed. Number 2, if you need to access the restrooms, you can do so by going through either one of these double doors over here on the left or over here on the right, and then making immediate lefts. Third piece of housekeeping item, this is actually up here on our side screens. Please, please, please refrain from outbursts, shouting out comments or questions. As I already said, we got so much information we want to get out to y'all. So little time to do it. We want to make the most of the time that we have available. And if for some reason you are unable to abide by those principles, we will ask y'all to leave. Which brings me to my 4th and final piece of housekeeping items for today. We're all witnessing and seeing this growing movement, especially in the media narrative, that we need to defund those that are keeping us safe, not just here in our community of Austin or all across the state or all across the country, but now even down at our border. And what I want to do is let Officer Tuminelli, who's here in the back, helping us keep us safe here today and every day. I want you to know, and all of your brothers and sisters in arms know, that as long as TPPF exists, we will always battle back against that ridiculous narrative that y'all don't need resources to keep us safe. How about a round of applause for officers? And with that note, I want to bring our fearless leader, Chief Executive Officer to the stage, Dr. Kevin Roberts, who's going to lead us through this discussion on the ever important crisis at our border. Dr. Kevin Roberts, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
It's great to see all of you here. Can't see you if you're online, but I know there are thousands of you out there. Join me in welcoming our great governor of the state of Texas, Greg Abbott. Governor Abbott, thanks for being with us.
Great to be here.
You know, there's a little bit in the news going on. Have you noticed that?
No, what's going on?
You know, you go, we were chatting about this in the green room and you said, Kevin, we're obviously starting with border insecurity, right? I said, yes, sir. And obviously we do have some good things we're going to talk about. You know, one of the things we try to do in our conversations, as you know well from being a longtime friend of this organization, is focus on the optimism, focus on the hopefulness. But part of that as Texans is to read reality truthfully. And it's important to you, it's important to us, it's important to every Texan, and I would argue every American, that we take a little bit of time at the beginning of our conversation today for you to outline for us the origins of this disaster at the border, and then we're going to unpack some additional solutions.
Let's do it. So let's begin, if you would, where we were a year ago. Where we were a year ago is that under President Trump, the border was more secure than it had ever been. And there were some very simple reasons why. One is because the president negotiated the Remain in Mexico policy. 2, he implemented the Title 42 policy. I'm sure you know what that is. In case you don't, the Title 42 policy is a health-based policy for those who were coming across the border. The president said you can't come across the border because you could have COVID. And because of healthcare reasons, we don't want people to come into the country and spreading COVID. 3, he ended catch and release. And 4, he began building a border wall. You add all those things together, and they proved to be very effective, in addition to sending the signal, which is opposite of the signal of what President Biden is sending right now. The message that Trump sent is that he was securing the sovereignty of the United States of America and would not allow open borders and allow into our country anybody who wanted to come here. When Biden took over as president, he eliminated all of those programs that proved so incredibly successful and he sent the exact opposite message across the entire world. And that is no longer is the Biden administration securing our border, but in addition to that, he was implementing open border policies, attracting people from across the entire world to come into the United States. And it was that type of messaging that led to the oncoming of the incredible number of Haitians, which is just the most recent example. So what is Texas doing to respond to this? Let me take through the things that we're doing, and I will tell you in advance. What Texas is doing is not only more than what any other state has ever done. I suggest to you that what Texas is doing is more than what every other state has ever done added together, because Texas is stepping up and doing everything possible to make sure we secure our border. One thing that was done that is needed, because these things don't come free. We have to have funding. And through both the regular session and the special session, we have now added $3 billion from Texas taxpayers to secure our border. Let me tell you what that money is going toward. One, it is going to add National Guard on our border. Those National Guard have been authorized by me as governor to enforce the Texas laws, along with the Texas Department of Public Safety, which is the second thing that we're funding of people going down there. So when you add together the Texas Department of Public Safety officers as well as the National Guard, we have thousands of people on the border already securing the border, with more added on a weekly basis as we continue to add the personnel needed to secure the border. And to give you an example of the effect that they have, I'm going to give you the words, not of myself or not of somebody who represents the state of Texas. I'm going to give you the words of the Border Patrol themselves. You all remember all the people coming across the border in Del Rio, the people who were walking across that dam, crossing from Mexico into Texas. And what the Border Patrol told the media is the people coming across the border ended immediately when the Texas National Guard and the Texas Department of Public Safety, they formed a wall unto themselves. It was a wall of the DPS vehicles and the National Guard vehicles with law enforcement officers on the border or riverside of those vehicles. And as soon as they built that barrier of vehicles and law enforcement personnel, the Border Patrol said at that instant, people stopped coming across the border. I tell you that because it shows, if you would, one of these strategies that is being used to secure the border, but also as a foreshadowing of what we are working on strategizing right now, because you may have heard there are additional caravans that are planning on coming to the state of Texas. We know that. We have intelligence about that. And we are working with National Guard generals and with Director McCraw of the Texas Department of Public Safety to begin the preparations right now for all the different strategies that we will use to try to repel these oncoming caravans the exact same way that we were able to repel and end the Haitians who were coming across the border. In addition to those strategies, there's another strategy that we implemented, and that is to begin to arrest and jail people who are coming across the border illegally. Let me tell you how this process works. We needed to create an entirely new criminal justice system in South Texas with courts, with judges, with jails to house the people that we were arresting. The jails were full. We had to work with the Texas Department of Criminal Justice to create thousands of jail beds. We worked with the Office of Court Administration to create the judges who were needed to adjudicate these proceedings. And then we needed to work with prosecutors at the local level, because just because we arrest somebody doesn't mean that they will go to jail or wind up in jail for a very long time if we do not have local prosecutors who are willing to prosecute them and add to the sentences the length of time that they deserve. The length of time they deserve and the length of time they get is enhanced because I declared a disaster for these borders, for these counties in the border region. And whenever that happens, that increases or enhances the penalties that people face as a consequence of committing a crime. And so we now have trespassing in South Texas along the border. When people come across the border and they're walking along private property or even public property, the city property or county property where there are no trespassing signs up. And now because the penalties are enhanced, it turns into criminal trespass. And then when you add some other charges that we've come up with, it could lead to, at a minimum, of 6 months in jail or up to a year in jail. And we are now implementing this arrest and jail proceeding. We have more than 1,000 people behind bars in these jails in South Texas, with many more beds available as we continue that process. On top of all of that, as you know, we also now have funding where we are building the Texas border wall. Let me tell you where we are in that border wall process. The first thing that needed to be done, because this is such a huge construction project, we needed to hire a general contractor, a program manager who would be in charge of all of the contracts that will be procured in order to build the wall. We already have the program managers in place. It's 2 companies that have experience at building a wall at these procedures, and they are working on contracts as we speak for the purpose of building the border wall. The process that Texas will pursue should be faster than what the Trump administration was able to pursue for several reasons. First, the Trump administration in building the wall, they had to acquire property, typically through lawsuit, through eminent domain purposes. Because there are so many landowners on the border who are so frustrated and so angry about the open border policies of the Biden administration, we have so many landowners who are offering their property for Texas to build a wall on. And then on top of that, we have state property that we're building a wall on. So for the first iteration of the miles that we will be building, we have no land acquisition cost or no delay in the process of building the wall to acquire that land. All we have to do is to get the bids that we are getting as we speak from those who want to build the wall. And in this regard also, it's working faster because we're not inventing the wheel. We are just reshaping the wheel for the terrain on which we will be building the wall. Another thing that will make this a little bit less costly than it was for the Trump administration, a lot of the wall that the Trump administration built included levees and then fences on top of those levees around areas where there could be flooding around the Rio Grande River. We, for the most part, will not be building any of those levee walls. Instead, they will be built on other territory. And as a result, our costs may be only half as much in most of the regions that we will be building as it was for the Trump administration. So we're working at a speed faster and at a lower cost than the Trump administration was in being able to get up that wall. But on top of those strategies, there's even more that we are doing, because we are using legal tools to try to require the Biden administration to follow the procedures that were put in place by the Trump administration. When the Trump administration put in place the Remain in Mexico policy, he did it under the Administrative Procedures Act. And Biden did not follow the administrative procedures in repealing the Remain in Mexico policy. So we went to a federal district judge in Texas, interestingly, a judge who was appointed by Donald Trump. And we have now received a federal judge court ruling ordering the Biden administration to reinstate the Remain in Mexico policy. And then, but here's the deal. We got that judgment before you saw the catastrophe of all the Haitians coming across the border. And because it's clear that the Biden administration did not impose the Remain in Mexico policy with regard to the Haitians, it's clear they were in violation of that federal order. So last Friday, we went back to court seeking to hold the Biden administration responsible for not following a federal judge's decision. By the way, I didn't mention the fullness of this. After the federal judge's decision, the Biden administration appealed that all the way up to the United States Supreme Court, and the United States Supreme Court allowed that lower court decision to remain in place. Separate from that, and in addition to that, we've also filed a lawsuit requiring the Biden administration to continue to enforce the Title 42 rule that the Trump administration came up with. We've not yet had a hearing in that case. It is in a court where the judge was appointed by President Trump. And so we'll see if we get the same result in that case as we did in the Remain in Mexico place. But if we can get those two procedures back into place, that will do more than anything else to staunch the flow of people coming across the border illegally. But in the meantime, the main thing I want you to know, the main takeaway I want you to have, and that is know that we have thousands of personnel on the border as we speak right now to ensure that we are going to be guarding the safety and security of the people of the state of Texas as much as possible and making arrests as much as possible. One last thing about arrests, because there's so much we have done, it doesn't always come to mind in an orderly way. I just signed last week in the Rio Grande Valley a new law that was passed during this past session that makes it far easier to arrest and to prosecute smugglers. And so we are going after the smugglers who are bringing the people into the United States of America. And this is a felony that will keep them behind bars a long time in a way that's far easier, making sure we keep these people out of the state of Texas. So there's a lot that we've done, but there's a lot more to do. And we will be relentless in making sure that we use every tool and strategy to secure the border in Texas.
Well, thanks for that. And I want to follow up on that point before moving on to a couple of other topics, because obviously the border situation is top of mind. You're a great legal mind. You don't have to hear that from me. And give us some insight, the people of Texas, the folks in this audience, in person and online, into your crystal ball thinking. The Biden-Harris regime is going to continue to create inflection points. They're violating the rule of law. And I know from having spoken to a lot of people across Texas, as you do every day, that the question on everyone's mind is Texas's governor willing to push the envelope when it comes to this relationship with a federal regime that simply does not care about the plight of Texans right now?
We are, and I can give you one easy example and show you what the result is. Several weeks ago, this is before the Haitian crisis, the crisis before that is when so many people were coming across the border that were going into in the Rio Grande Valley counties that had a high level of COVID. You might remember that instance where someone was found at a Whataburger and they tested positive for COVID. When that happened, I used my authority under Chapter 418 of the Texas Government Code to issue an executive order for public safety purposes where I can control the ingress and egress of any area for public safety purposes. And I said, pursuant to my order, no longer will migrants who have come across the border be allowed to travel about or be bussed around or transported anywhere into the state of Texas. That is pushing the envelope where we limit their ability to travel. Here's what happens. After I issued that executive order, the Biden administration took me to court, to a federal judge in Texas, and a federal judge in Texas said that exceeded our authority because it was contradictory to the federal government's authority under the laws passed by the United States Congress that puts the federal government in charge of migration-based issues. And we are still litigating that case on appeal, but it shows that we are willing to take stands and take action that in the past has never been done before, that are unorthodox approaches to use whatever strategy we possibly can to try to control the safety and security of the people in this state.
Thanks for that response, Governor. So all of this is happening while there's a little bit going on in Austin, namely a few special sessions of the legislature. And I just want to give you the opportunity to highlight what you think are the biggest wins, the biggest victories in terms of policies. Obviously, just as we were coming on stage, there's news that there's some progress made on some redistricting maps. And I guess the follow-up question there might be, if they don't get the redistricting done in this session, you're the governor, you got the power of the pen. What happens with a potential additional special session?
Well, first, I will comment about that, and that is we fully expect the legislature to get redistricting done. If they don't get it done this special session, we obviously will put it on another special session, but there was so much more that we wanted to accomplish, and maybe we have to narrow it down to one task at a time. And it may be that the only item that I put on the next session is going to be redistricting until they get the redistricting process done. However, I wouldn't call redistricting unto itself as a legislative win. Let me talk about some things that I know are issues that TPPF and people in our audience have been fighting for a long time. Let me start with a fundamental aspect about good conservative governance. And we can contrast it to what's going on in Washington, D.C. as we speak, where we see them trying to spend something like, what, 3.5 trillion? It seems like it changes by the day, 5 trillion. Do I hear higher, 6 trillion, 7 trillion?
Just wait a day, Governor.
But they have no sense of responsibility of living within their budgetary means. Texas showed the exact opposite. Imagine if people in Washington could say what I'm about to tell you about what we did with our budget this session. In Texas, we passed a balanced budget with no new taxes, leaving billions of dollars in our savings account. That is a conservative, balanced budget that Washington needs to do. But it gets better than that if you look for legacy-based purposes, but more importantly, if you look for future generations. We've created a budgetary constraint system in the state of Texas that will be good for generations to come when you look at several things we couple together. Because the law that we passed, that I know TPPF has been advancing for a long time, that we've had on the agenda every session I've been governor and finally passed, and that is we passed a law imposing spending limits on the Texas legislature where they cannot spend more in increased spending other than the growth of population and the increase in inflation. And so when you couple those spending limits with what we did last session, that actually makes it unconstitutional to have income tax in the state of Texas, you see that we have a conservative framework that would be good for conservative budgets for decades to come in the Lone Star State. And then on top of that, real quick, we passed what I call the freedom agenda. The freedom agenda goes to the core freedoms that we have guaranteed to us in the United States Constitution. The First Amendment, for example. We saw during the course of the pandemic that there were some local officials or national officials, whatever the case may be. There were some people who shut down churches during the time of COVID, and that violates the First Amendment freedom of religion. And so we passed a law saying that no official at any level can ever shut down churches and deny your ability to go to church and worship God Almighty. Staying in the First Amendment, we fought for conservative free speech by passing a law denying the ability of any social media outlet from denying conservative viewpoints on social media platforms in the Lone Star State. And then there's Second Amendment freedoms. We passed constitutional carry. And a law ensuring that Texas will be a Second Amendment sanctuary state. But just as profound is the law and order laws that we passed. Remember this phrase about the United States of America. America is a nation of blank, not a nation of blank. Robin can fill in that sentence. We are a nation of the rule of law, not the rule of men. And we instituted laws this session that fulfill that fundamental precept of the United States of America. The first step in it was to eliminate this chaotic scheme that you see in Seattle and Portland and Minneapolis and New York and some other states where they defunded the police. In Texas, we will not defund our law enforcement officers. We will. We needed this law because we happen to be right now in the one jurisdiction, the city of Austin, that did defund their police. And we made it financially impossible for the city of Austin to continue to defund police, but also financially impossible for any jurisdiction to defund the police. We're going to respect and support our law enforcement officers, not disrespect and defund our police in Texas. Second thing we did, which is unfortunately desperately needed, and that is we had to reform a broken bail system in Texas. You see the chaos in Harris County in particular, where you see judges who ran for office and they told you who they were when they ran to be a judge. They said they were running as Democrat socialists, and they've acted as socialist jurists, where they would release people on personal recognizant bonds for committing some of the most heinous crimes. And according to Crime Stoppers in Houston, there have been something like 100 people in the Houston area who have lost their lives because of people who were released on bail that should not have been released on bail in Harris County. That has to stop. And that is why we passed the Damon Allen Act to reform a broken bail system in Texas to keep behind bars dangerous criminals. Then there is another rule of law issue that we address that is so incredibly important. It's the rule of law issue that deals with democracy itself, and that is election integrity. So Texas passed the strongest election integrity law in the United States of America, making sure that we crack down on cheating and illegal voting at the ballot box. Let me tell you two primary ways that we crack down. One concerns mail-in ballots. Even the Democrats agree that mail-in ballots are an easy way for people to be able to cheat. And we've made it far harder to cheat with mail-in ballots than ever before. Another area where there is cheating taking place in the election process, and that is with ballot harvesting. And I'm going to recite to you a sentence from a decision that was authored by a federal district judge appointed by Barack Obama, who heard the voter ID case in the state of Texas. And what this judge wrote is that ballot harvesting occurs in abundance in Texas as it concerns voter fraud, or voter fraud occurs in abundance in Texas as it concerns ballot harvesting. And so we wanted to make sure that we ended ballot harvesting in Texas. So we made it a third-degree felony for anybody who commits ballot harvesting fraud in the state of Texas. Last thing I'll tell you about this is it is total insanity for what these Democrats are saying that, oh, they're being denied the right to vote, all that kind of stuff. We are providing more hours to vote than what existed before we passed this law. But more important than that, if you look at all the days of early voting and the additional hours for early voting that we provided, compare that with the state where Joe Biden is from, Delaware, where they provided exactly 0 days of early voting. If they think there's voter suppression in Texas, by God, there's real voter suppression in the state of Delaware. And so we made it easier to vote, but harder to cheat in the state of Texas. As it concerns audits, Texas has the largest forensic audit election process of any state in the United States of America, where we're going back and looking at exactly what happened in the 2020 elections in the 4 largest counties, 2 largest Democrat, 2 largest Republican counties in the state of Texas, to make sure that we have integrity embedded in our system. And if not, we'll find out what went wrong, why it went wrong, what must be done to correct it, and to prosecute the allegations that have already been made to the Secretary of State's office concerning this past election. Bottom line, we're going to stop cheating and illegal voting at the ballot box in Texas.
It's a great list. It's, to paraphrase Reagan, it's like it's morning in Texas again. So I'd sit here and talk to you all afternoon, but you're a busy guy. So one final question before we head off, Governor, and that is, in spite of all of the challenges facing America, and unfortunately we have some of them in Texas because of our federal government, why did you wake up optimistic about the future this morning?
You know, one thing that is gives me a lot of hope. And that is especially what we see among the Hispanic community, along the border communities. They feel completely abandoned by the Democrats that they have been voting for in the past. I've been down in border communities pretty much on a weekly basis for the past few months. And from county to county to county, I hear similar refrains. We made a huge mistake with Biden, or Biden has abandoned us, or the only people helping us are Republicans. And they say they will never make that mistake again. Let me tell you something. The Democrats have misunderstood what the Hispanic community really believes in their heart. The Hispanic community doesn't believe in this crazy socialistic agenda. They believe in faith in God. They believe in family and the sanctity of life. They believe in the freedom as opposed to government mandates. The Hispanic community represents the very best core values of the Republican Party. And I see a very red future for the border communities in the state of Texas and a very red future for the Lone Star State.
Amen, Governor. Governor Greg Abbott, thanks so much for making time for this. Y'all join me in thanking our governor for being here. God bless you.